And I think we should begin. Greetings, everybody. My name's Wendy Galernter. I'll be hosting the meeting today. And I am joined with my co-host, Larry Stowell, who's in the participants list as Help Desk Larry. So if you have any issues with Zoom or the Q&A, he's the one to contact in the chat. And get started. So very quickly, our agenda today, main a highlight is our guest speaker, Jessica Pishko, who you'll be hearing from in just a few minutes. She's going to be talking for a while. Then we'll have a good Q&A session with Jessica. And then we'll wrap up at the end with some upcoming actions and events in the next week or two that I think you'll be very interested in. So please use the chat, say hello, tell us where you are calling in from. Yeah, Susan, you had a question? We may have to unmute you, or you can type it in the chat. While that's happening, I'll keep going. Just to let you know, we are recording this meeting, and after the meeting, usually within 24 hours, we send out an email with the link to the recording, as well as all of the links that I talk about in the course of the meeting. And as always with our newsletters, with anything I mail out to you, with video presentations, please share as widely as possible. Your friends, your relatives are hungry for someone to tell them what to do right now, and you can be that person. You can be that trusted person. And so just take whatever pieces of what I send you that you like and share widely. And we will have, as I said, a question and answer period after Jessica speaks. If you can, please go to the Q&A icon at the bottom of your Zoom display and put your questions there. When you put them in the chat, it's sometimes too hard to keep track of them. Much easier in the Q&A section, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible. Look, everybody, this has been a horrendous week, and we're in for more. But I hope all of you are coping and hanging in there as well as possible. What we want to do at this meeting today and what we do at all of our monthly meetings is to give you some good information, some solidarity, some hope, and probably most importantly, some actions that you can take in the near future that are as effective as possible. And our group, Swing Left Take Action San Diego, just very briefly, our plan for 2025 has 4 parts. One, and I'll come back to this when we get to our action section at the end of the meeting, but just very briefly, to do whatever we can to delay, obstruct, or protest the MAGA agenda. Number 2, to send a political message to the country and to the world by winning elections, whether at the county, state, or national level. To use social media and whatever messaging platforms we have to make the Trump-Musk agenda as unpopular as possible. And then finally, to think globally, but to act locally, understanding that local politics may be where we have our greatest leverage in the near future. So we can take local action, not just to be successful and have leverage, but also to show people and the country what we are for and not just what we're against. And that's probably the best intro I can think of to talking about our guest speaker this month, Jessica Pishko, who is a journalist and also a lawyer who has been reporting on the criminal justice system and the criminal legal system for over 10 years. And she's had a big focus on the political power of sheriffs since 2016, actually. In addition to her newsletter, Posse Comitatus, which we're going to put the links in the chat and then also in my follow-up email. So you can check out her newsletter, Posse Comitatus, her New Yorker article, which is how I became acquainted with Jessica's work. This was in a January edition of the New Yorker magazine about how sheriffs could be used to power Trump's deportation machine. And then her book, The Highest Law in the Land, just published last year on how the unchecked power of sheriffs threatens democracy. She's also published in a wide variety of other publications. She's a longtime Texas resident, but she currently lives with her family in North Carolina, and I think did some also very good reporting on the hurricane disaster in North Carolina a few months ago. And so I just, on a very bold whim, decided to contact Jessica out of the blue. She didn't know me from anyone, and asked her if she'd be able to talk to us. And I was absolutely thrilled and honored when she said yes. So we're very lucky to have somebody speaking on an issue that I think affects people all over the country here today. And with that, Jessica, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Wendy. I really appreciate it. Um, and I appreciate the invitation. And I just want to thank everyone who appeared on this call. I know that it is a difficult time for a lot of people. So I just want to start with some space and acknowledgement that, things have been really hard. There's a lot happening and a lot coming at everybody very quickly. And to that extent, too, right? Things are changing really fast. And I think that for everyone, particularly anyone in the law space or the journalism space, I have noticed, it's been very hard to keep up. And things have, I think, happened more quickly and changed faster than people, at least that I expected. So I just want to acknowledge that and thank you guys because it's really local groups like you all who are doing a lot of the hard work. So I just want to, take time to say thank you again for being here and listening and doing the work that you do. So what I'm gonna do, and I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions, which, as Wendy mentioned, you can put in the Q&A. What I want to do is start just with a brief, I'll just do a brief overview of county sheriffs and talk a little bit about what the national landscape is like, define what they are. We'll talk about the landscape, what powers they have for people who may be less familiar, and then we can talk a little more specifically about the role in California and San Diego, and then we'll move to questions if that's okay. So it's a little strange given everything that's happening in national politics to start talking about someone as local as the county sheriff. But as you guys know, in San Diego, right, the county sheriff has become a really important political figure at the intersection of many things, right? Especially mass incarceration, politics, and immigration, which we know are really important right now. So the entire country has basically elected sheriffs. There's just over 3,000. There's a few states that don't have them. So Alaska and Hawaii just don't have counties, so they don't have elected sheriffs. And Connecticut and Rhode Island also don't have elected sheriffs. So in most places, sheriffs are elected. There's like a small handful of exception because there's a few home rule counties. So one of those home rule counties is actually the county that contains Seattle. Seattle actually has an appointed sheriff. Most sheriffs are elected. They're mostly elected to 4-year terms. A lot of times those elections are off cycle. So I know California just changed their law to make it possibly more on cycle, but because a lot of these elections are off cycle, that means that uh, people are not as aware of these elections. And in many places, especially California, actually, the primary election is usually where the sheriff is actually decided. And sometimes people are just not aware even that primary election is occurring. And the reason why I think sheriffs are at top of mind for a lot of people locally is that they have other important functions as opposed to city police. So just to set up the comparison, city police chiefs are not elected, right? They're usually appointed by a mayor or city council. That also means they can be removed by that same mayor or city council, and they can usually be removed for almost any reason. And you'll see all the time if a scandal happens at a police department, usually the police chief will be fired or the police chief will resign. It happens pretty regularly. The other thing is police chiefs kind of move around the country. So police chiefs can go from city to city across the country. They usually go from like smaller departments to bigger departments, right? They sort of have this like trajectory. Sheriffs are a little different. Now, a lot of sheriffs who are elected, especially in California, have experience in law enforcement. Now, California actually has the most requirements to be sheriff of any state, which is something we could talk about if people want to. But California actually has a substantial law enforcement requirement. But sheriffs have to live in the county where they serve. And across the country, we know that most sheriffs actually went to high school in the counties where they're elected sheriff. So they're really local officials, right? They're not usually moving. Deputies, on the other hand, are different, right? So just to say, the deputies do move from department to department. People move around. You probably already seen that deputies will move from like the local police department to the sheriff's office, depending on what's going on. And I think the important thing about sheriffs to keep in mind are three main jobs that they have, right? So the first job is sheriffs and their deputies do policing on the street. So just like all law enforcement, including local police, they do traffic stops, they investigate crimes, they serve warrants, they arrest people, they do all the same things that police can do. The second thing that sheriffs do that's different is they run the county jail. And in some places, those county jails are rather large, right? County jails range from very small, like 15 to 30 people jails in some rural areas to thousands of people, right? San Diego is, of course, a place with a very large county jail. But some places have much smaller ones. And we also know that across the country, these county jails are getting more dangerous. And we are seeing more violence and deaths inside of county jails. And I do want to add, in terms of policing, too, that we have a lot of indications that sheriff's offices are more violent and causing more deaths than police departments are. So the latest information we have on in basically deaths, shooting deaths kind of in policing, so deaths not inside of jails, we know that actually those are going up. So law enforcement shootings are increasing instead of decreasing. This has been going on for a couple of years. It turns out that data seems to show that a lot of those deaths are in more rural areas, and most of them are sheriffs. So it seems like, while certainly, I want to say like police shootings are happening everywhere and they're increasing everywhere, they're particularly increasing in rural areas and where sheriffs are policing. So that, I think, points to something in particular that's going on. We also know that jail deaths are steadily increasing, right? That we have not seen a decrease in jail deaths, and we can also certainly talk specifically about California, where even though California jails have reduced their populations, we know that California, right, has tried to do a variety of criminal justice reforms, that jail deaths are going up. They're going up in particular very much in California. And this is in California, it's everywhere. It's every jail. And I know that in particular, the San Diego jail has experienced a lot of in custody deaths for a while. Even though, to be clear, California is one of the few states where you have county oversight of sheriffs. Most states don't have that. So I think it's something to think about, that, California has a more robust system of oversight, yet we still see a large number of deaths. And I think the third thing about sheriffs that is in this category is their role as political actors. So, unlike police chiefs, sheriffs, because they are elected, have different rights in terms of the First Amendment and their ability to make political statements, right? And also set policy within their department. So when sheriffs are elected in general, they are able to set the policy in their department as they will, right? And most of you guys are probably already familiar with the fact that one of the issues with sheriffs is that they're not directly controlled by the county. They're sort of equal to other county offices, right? Like your county, like your district attorney, your board of supervisors, right? They're considered kind of equals. And the sheriff therefore could set policies in their department as they see fit. And it's not always done publicly, but you might not know that the sheriff has revised their policies. And the other thing is they can usually conduct politics, um, kind of political speech in a way that I think seems like something that you don't think law enforcement would do. So, for example, we know when Donald Trump was running for president that a lot of sheriffs like would appear at his rallies and political events. A lot of sheriffs endorsed President Trump, right? That was something that happened. There were some sheriffs who endorsed Kamala Harris as well, but right, so they endorse people running for office. They can make political statements like, I'm sure, you may have heard things like this law, for example, I was just thinking of the recent passage I know in California of Prop 36, right, that has rolled back some of the reforms, right? Sheriffs could say, we like Prop 36. We think Prop 36 is a good law. We think the previous regime was bad. Or we don't like Gavin Newsom's policies. Or we think Joe Biden is causing a border crisis, right? So they could sort of say like, oh, these are the policies of politicians I agree with. These are not the policies of politicians that I agree with, in a way that I think can feel like they're moving outside of their like sphere of expertise. Like, because sheriffs are law enforcement, I think people rely on them as experts, but they're also politicians. And so they will make statements in a way that like benefits them politically, that may or may not be linked to actual policies in their department or facts that are going on the ground or other things that might be going on inside the county. And so again, in California, of course, everyone probably is familiar with the Los Angeles County Sheriff Alex Villanueva as an example of someone who, right, would make political statements or make policies that were like contrary to what the county wants. Same in San Diego, right? I know that the county has asked for specific policies and the sheriff said that she doesn't want to do those policies, right? So this is sort of a common political dynamic that occurs across the country. Um, and I'll just kind of we can move on to questions. I just wanted to point out that right now, many people are thinking about sheriffs. I'm certainly thinking about sheriffs because of Trump's plan for mass deportation. A lot of this is being run by Tom Homan, who you guys have probably seen. He is the border czar, which seems like mostly he's the public face of kind of the deportation machine. And to kind of set this up, like Tom Homan has a very strong relationship with a lot of sheriffs across the country. I want to add that sheriffs across the country, and this is true in California too, tend to be a lot more conservative than the places where they're elected. So there's been like statewide studies that show that the sheriff is like, on the whole, sheriffs are very conservative. They lean very Republican. They tend to be very pro law and order. I mean, I don't think these are very surprising. But just to say that, like, we have a lot of suggestions that like sheriffs are vastly more conservative than other elected officials and the people that they're policing, right? So this is like a pretty common issue. Now, Tom Homan himself has built a lot of relationships with sheriffs through a lot of national sheriff groups. This is sort of part of their political power and lobbying. They do quite a lot of lobbying at the federal level. And because of that, he already had connections with quite a number of sheriffs. And I think that that's led to him tapping into sheriffs and talking to sheriffs right away about mass deportation and attempting to sort of see how far he could push the boundary. It's been a little interesting to watch because in the news lately, there's been a few articles about sheriffs who are sort of saying they don't have the funding to do immigration enforcement. Like I've seen a lot of back and forth about sheriffs and immigration enforcement and Tom Homan and the National Sheriff Association. I do think that um, some of this is a little bit of a political back and forth to see if they could get the Trump administration to fund sheriffs to do federal immigration enforcement. So just to be clear, right now, sheriffs receive some federal funding through a variety of local policing grants, but they don't get funding to do immigration enforcement. In some places, sheriffs do receive money to house people being detained for ICE. This is something that some sheriffs use their jails for. This is not something that's done in California because it's not allowed by state law. And so to sort of go back again, like immigration can be the interaction between sheriffs and the government and immigration can be confusing because there's layers of both the federal government and then the state government, which I could sort of clarify for people if it, because I think it feels very confusing right now. In particular, the Tom Homan and the Trump administration are saying a lot of things about deportations, and they're doing a lot of things very quickly that feel really illegal. And so I think that it's hard to separate out like what actually, well, it's hard to kind of separate out, I think, what's going on the ground and also like what exactly the role of sheriffs is. There is a pretty firm precedent to say that the federal government cannot order county sheriffs to do things. This is very well established law. And I do think that what we've seen is one of the things we haven't seen is Trump telling sheriffs they must do things. Now they're sort of suggesting it. Like we could talk, there's the Emil Bove memo and this lawsuit they brought against a sheriff at upstate New York. So some of this is being suggested or the withholding of funds. But I think that there's this, like, it's kind of an interesting interaction because of the fact that the federal government cannot directly tell sheriffs exactly what to do. So they're trying to exert pressure in like other ways, which is why you see, I think, Tom Homan doing all these other things on television because he cannot actually order local law enforcement to do things. So he's trying to kind of use like bullying and propaganda to persuade them to do it. That's why I think we have a lot of like, that's why I think he's on TV a lot doing quite a lot of bullying. I'm gonna stop there because I rambled for a bit. So I want to go on to questions. Wendy, do you have any that you want to ask?
Yes, I think the first thing I wanted to do is we do have some representatives here from the Racial Justice Coalition of San Diego, who are one of the co-sponsors for this meeting, and Dr. Darwin Fishman is here representing them. I think he just wanted to add a few more things on
Oh, sure.
to what you said, Jessica, and then we'll get to questions. And Darwin, we just need to make you a panelist because thanks to webinar, you can't just start talking anymore.
Darwin, I think you have to accept on your end. Okay, Darwin, you actually declined. Let me try that again.
Okay, I think we got it. Hey, Darwin.
Muted.
Yeah, can you unmute? Okay, while we're waiting for that to get sorted out, let me ask at
You
least
here?
one of the questions that came up as you were talking, Jessica, and that
Okay,
is
they're on
where
now.
is
Sorry.
I'll ask this question, then we'll let Darwin go on. Where is the data, or where can people find the data that you used to make some of the claims that you made in your talk.
Yes, I just saw that question. So I can send you a few links. The shooting deaths come from Mapping Police Violence, which is a nonprofit project that tracks police shootings. And I will try to look up it. If I don't put the link in the chat because I can't find it right away, I'll send it to Wendy, and you can send that out. And then a lot of the other data about sheriffs, I would have to look. A lot of it is in the early chapters of my book. In terms of California jail deaths, actually, Cal Matters, which is a independent publication, has done quite a lot of reporting on jail deaths across California, and so they are the ones who are actually measuring the number of people. So I do know that that has been widely reported. I will look for Mapping Police Violence. Put it in the chat while we're talking. But
Yeah, and of course your book, which I read, has a treasure trove of information in
right, I was
it.
gonna
So
say some of the more general data about like sheriffs of their elections is cited in my book. It comes from like a variety of studies. So like I could try to pull some out and send to you that you could send around.
great. All right, now, Darwin, it looks like we have your face and your voice all at the same time.
Yeah, thank you. No, it's funny. I'm here with Buki Domingos, the co-founders for the Racial Justice Coalition, and you'd put her on. So I got it. Thank you for that. And this is perfect. Thank you, Jessica, for your presentation. I'm Darwin, working with the Racial Justice Coalition. We've actually, with George Floyd, we started a campaign for in-custody deaths and directed at the Sheriff's Department, and then also prosecutor resigned at district attorney. And the Sheriff's Department, exactly following your presentation, was for a local level, because of the political pressure for the police department and the mayor, they were offering all sorts of stuff. But Sheriff's Department, not so much, not really into reform. We had that, and then the other issue is when they go together is that the in-custody deaths were not just high in California and San Diego. San Diego had the highest rate. Our in-custody death rate just a few years ago hit 20. We had in-custody deaths. And people are like, okay, 20, what's the big deal? What we found is that was actually higher than Rikers Island. And we've got a smaller population. So our jail death rate, and we state audit, Dr. Kayla Weber's assembly member who's moving up to Senate, her state audit showed that we had a higher rate than LA, San Francisco, anywhere else in California. And what we found, of course, with this entrenched fight with the Sheriff's Department, it's exactly that. Because it's an elected position, it's been extremely hard. The other thing to add for you, and this is why it's so important to do the local and national, because a lot of people don't know this. Most people in San Diego don't know this. A friend of mine in the Sheriff's Department, retired, had shared this with me, which is our sheriff that we had for almost like 20 years, Gore, came from the FBI. And he was actually one of the people that was on the Waco team in Texas. So that history, and it's not surprising he would go from the FBI to sheriff because he'd get the independence that he likes. I will also say this real quick. Care First California did a statewide report that's extremely good. They have literally chapters for each of the counties, and they use things like the statewide audit that was done by Weber's office. And we also have our members on here, impacted family members that have died in custody and they've been killed by the Sheriff's Department. And that's been on our ongoing work. So I did also want to thank you for allowing me to speak, Wendy, because I wanted to add that folks are concerned about this, want to work with us, definitely contact us, and we'll add our information in the chat. One last thing also, because I don't know if you know this, Jessica, but your timing is perfect for us. We just lost a supervisor. And literally her last vote was to stop the Sheriff's Department from going against a California law on immigration. The Sheriff's Department, it's not clear they're going to follow California law, and they're going to work with ICE on immigration. And it was almost like, you don't oversee us supervisors. Who cares? Have a fight with us. Let's see who wins. I'm hoping that in your talk, and I'm glad people are here, is that we really wake up to how big of a deal the Sheriff's Department is. And we've got a really intense fight. Buki, did you want to?
One second, I did want to quickly acknowledge one of the impacted family members that is on this webinar. Her name is Patricia D. Arman. and her brother was killed, shot to death on the streets in San Diego about a year ago. And so I just wanted to put a shout out to all the impacted family members, while also educating folks that whether they're in jail or on the streets, the moment somebody's pulled over by law enforcement, they remain in custody unless let go.
Yeah, one other thing real quickly with Buki on there, because you mentioned the civilian oversight. Buki was on the civilian oversight, the CLERB here, and she was also one of the only people that was ever on there that was a medical professional. And that was also a real issue because most all of the in custody deaths, they're saying are drug overdose. And of course, Buki found pretty quickly that's not the case. That's not the whole story, what's going on. And she also got pretty quickly moved off of CLERB. So that's another issue we're continuing to have with the Sheriff's Department and the in-custody deaths. So thank you again for coming. Thank you, Wendy, for putting this together. And this is very helpful for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Darwin. Well, Jessica, it looks like, a number of the questions are also about what can we do? How to, as a regular citizen,
Yeah.
organize to get some accountability of the sheriff, whether it's San Diego or somewhere else.
I do want to say that thank you for, everyone who came on. Thank you. I do think that one of the things I talk a lot in my book is issues with in custody deaths are, it's a really dispiriting topic. And I think one issue I'm very deeply concerned about is the treatment of impacted families. And so I do want to say that, I appreciate that people are impacted by this. I think it's, it's a sort of category of people that shouldn't exist. Right? Sheriffs have custody, sheriffs will say, I think across the country, they will all say things like, well, it's because of a health condition. Memphis, actually, the jail in Memphis just had a recent unfortunate number of people who died in custody. And the sheriff there said, well, it was because they had diabetes. So they sort of will blame diseases, they'll blame drugs. I mean, what I have to say about that is, sheriffs have custody in jail of people 24/7. And so when you take someone's freedom 24/7, you are in charge of taking care of them. So if there are, drugs inside of the jail, which is true, right? There are drugs inside of the jail. Or if people have medical conditions, right? That is the sheriff's responsibility. It's not something for them to, I do think that these sheriffs have a horrible tendency to act as if it's not their fault. But, if you want to put someone in jail, then I think that you have to take care of them. And I know that the issues in San Diego has been a problem for a long time. I read about the ICE, and I was also just reading issues with not turning over documents, which is that's a common civilian oversight issue. So I do want to say other civilian oversight committees in California have a similar issue, which is that, it seems like sheriffs are, look, they have civilian oversight and they know they have to comply to some extent, but they're learning how to comply-ish. And one of the ways in which they're comply-ish is by not turning over all the documents, claiming that documents are protected by attorney-client privilege. Another huge issue in California, of course, are the deputy unions. Not every state has deputy unions. Deputy unions in California are very powerful. And I do know that they serve a big role in blocking oversight and accountability because they will be told not to testify. They, get instructions from their union how to behave. And so there's so really, when you're doing civilian oversight of the sheriff's office, you really have, right, you have the sheriff and you have the deputies, and then you also have the deputies union becomes like a player in oversight. And I think it's one that people don't always appreciate. And like I said, because California is unique in the power of their deputy unions, that they get almost as big of a role in oversight as the oversight commission sometimes. I know it's been a big issue in Los Angeles, right? That the deputy union has been a big issue. I am going to look and see. I'm trying to figure out where to start. I see a lot of what to do. So a few people are asking about these the restrictions, this interplay between state law, so the California law about immigration and the county law and what the sheriff could do. So one of the issues is that, so California has a state law that says sheriffs aren't supposed to cooperate with ICE. And in general, what the California law says is that they're not supposed to call ICE when someone's being released, which is something that's also common across the country. They can't enter 287G agreements, which are agreements sheriffs enter into to become ICE agents, basically. And they can't hold people longer for ICE to pick them up, right? Because those are sort of the strategies ICE uses. I mean, basically, ICE likes to pick up people in county jail because they know where they are. This is like the gist. ICE knows where you are if you're in a county jail. It's public information. And so ICE likes that because they could drive a van to the county jail, pick people up, and then drive away. They don't have to go. And, Tom Homan would say, oh, it's like dangerous. It's not the danger issue. It's really just that like they know where people are. One of the issues, honestly, is that you guys probably know this, but immigrants commit a very low amount of crime. And so one of the things that Tom Homan is frustrated with is that he says, oh, I cannot find people who have been accused of crimes. Well, the truth is, honestly, they just don't exist. The Biden administration for 4 years certainly, deported a large number of people and has always, they have always deported people who have been convicted of serious crimes like rape or murder or serious assaults. That's always been done. There is not like a population of immigrants with criminal convictions, with serious criminal convictions that people should be worried about. So I do want to put out there that this is like looking for folks to deport and sort of making up reasons to deport them because the people that they're saying they want to deport kind of don't exist. Like there is not a problem. So let's put it that way. And in fact, under Biden, the number one kind of criminal conviction for which people were deported was DUI. Now, DUIs are bad and they're very serious felonies, but that's certainly not right. That's not, I think, the kind of pumped up, criminal stuff that Tom Homan makes it sound like. And again, there have been high profile incidents. And of course, these incidents are tragic. But what I will say is like, they are more rare. Immigrants are less likely, right, to commit those kinds of crimes. So like, we already know that. So these people kind of just don't exist. It seems like what San Diego did, right? The county wanted to create an additional regulation. So the state law says you can create more regulations to make sure your sheriff doesn't cooperate with ICE. And then the county voted and said, we want to make sure that the sheriff doesn't cooperate with ICE. And your sheriff said, no, right? Basically, like, I'm not going to do it. Now, a couple of sheriffs in California have, through the years, attempted to skirt the state law to cooperate with ICE. One issue is that jail admissions are online. So the data is public. One of the things ICE does do is look at the public data. This is something they do in like Chicago, other places that have like sanctuary city type laws, right? There's a few places around the country where there's limits, but what they can do is look at the logs, look at who's admitted, and decide if there's individuals that that ICE wants to target for arrest, right? And to be perfectly honest, like this is just basically racial profiling because they're just looking at like people's names. And so they'll just sort of target folks that they think might be immigrants, right? And this is unfortunately something that does happen. It's not always obvious when it happens. So I do think that that's something to look for. And the other common one is the one that is calling ICE when someone's being released. So let's say you've arrested someone that you think might be deportable. Some sheriffs will call ICE like right before so let's say the defendant pays bail and they're going to be released because that's the law. And sometimes sheriffs will notify ICE, right? They'll call ICE or email ICE and say, hey, we have this person. If you're interested, you can come pick them up. That's sort of the other round. That's like the other roundabout way that they sort of try to skirt it by saying, well, if you happen to be on this corner at this time, we're not involved, but like they're going to go out the front door. That's sort of like, we're not saying, but we're saying they're there. And so it sounds like what the county's trying to do is prevent all of this. They're trying to like prevent all of this kind of workaround. And your sheriff has said that she doesn't want to do it. I mean, it will be really interesting. I will say in California, the attorney general has some power over sheriffs. The attorney general has not exercised that power very often. And I know that, and I'm probably out of date, but I know that some of the involved groups and county commissioners have contacted the state attorney general to try to tell him that, there's a concern that this sheriff might not follow the law. I mean, a few sheriffs in Southern California have said similar things. So I saw one mention Chad Bianco. Chad Bianco has mentioned that, right? He intends to cooperate with ICE. Some of the sheriffs in Orange County and San Bernardino have also expressed this. So I do think that what you're seeing in San Diego is representative of a little bit of a statewide problem, because I do think you're going to have a few sheriffs in Southern California who are going to say, we kind of want to cooperate with ICE more than the state law is letting us. Technically, that would be the state attorney general's job to clarify. I see that it doesn't seem like he has. So one of my things in California is I'm always pushing people to that this is the attorney general it is written in the California Constitution that the attorney general is in charge of every law enforcement officer in California. So the attorney general can make rules for every sheriff. They just don't always choose to do it. And there's political reasons why they don't choose to do it. They don't want to get involved in what they see as like a local political fight. Nevertheless, I think if a lot of these sheriffs start to push the boundaries of the California law, I do think that's setting up like an issue that I think the state attorney general is the person who needs to like address this. I don't know if they will. You guys probably know Chad Bianco said he's going to run for governor as a Republican. And so sorry, Nancy. Sorry, when I saw your face. He is planning to run for governor. I do think one, he doesn't really have a chance of winning, but I do think he's going to use this as a platform to argue like against California's kind of like blue state policies. Like it's not, I think that that's what this is. This is, we kind of puts me in mind back to like the attempted recall of Gavin Newsom. Like this is sort of like another attempt to sort of argue like, there's a substantial percent of people in California who don't like these blue state policies.
Then it seems to me the leverage points we have are the Attorney General, the Board of Supervisors, 4 years from now, an election.
Yeah.
And then public opinion.
It really is. It's very hard to remove sheriffs. I mean, you guys have seen Los Angeles. It's very hard. Technically, recalls in California are not that hard. As you guys probably know, San Mateo is trying to recall their sheriff. So they're going through the same thing where they're struggling. I mean, sheriff removals are very interesting because I think they don't happen very often, and so people are not sure what to do. So sometimes what happens is people want to, like this is, I think, ongoing in San Mateo. Like people want to recall the sheriff. If the law's not clear or they haven't done it, like sub-sheriff removals, like they're from like, the 20s. Like it's like they haven't removed a sheriff for like 100 years. They don't know, is this law still good? We're not sure. We don't know the procedure. And it is also expensive, a little bit complicated, right? Because if you're doing a recall, you have to get signatures. And I do think that some people figure, well, we'll just wait for the election. And then we'll have the election and then we'll just vote them out. And then we won't have to deal with like this sort of issue of like how to do the recall. So it is hard. Like recalls are hard. They're hard everywhere across the country. Again, oftentimes I think because people just haven't done them and they don't, there's like confusion about how to do it. California is actually, it's easier to recall officials than in some other states. So, and the other issue is that most recalls require what is basically like a dereliction of duty. So the statutes will sort of say, oh, if they have to violate their oath of office. Now, the problem is sometimes there's stuff like, so San Mateo, for example, is facing corruption. So you have corruption, you have sheriffs arrested for crimes, so there's a variety of bad behavior that I think more squarely fits into that. The problem with over policing or irresponsible police, like let's say it's irresponsibility with the jail, right? Or not listening to the county commissioners or something like that. That is not clearly a dereliction of duty for the sheriff per their oath of office. I know it sounds weird. It sounds weird and confusing because, if you think back to when they wrote sheriff's oaths of offices, right? The idea was like sheriffs were supposed to arrest people and put them in jail. So if they're arresting people, putting them in jail, that's what they're supposed to be doing. There are not things in their oath of office that are like, well, you're supposed to treat immigrants with respect, or you're supposed to like listen to the county commissioners, or you're supposed to like make sure people in your jail come out alive. Like that's not actually in their like oath. And so I think it presents this like weird problem, to remember the oaths of office were written in like in the 1850s and 60s. So, they just, they were not thinking of the rights of people who were in jail. I mean, that's just not what anyone was thinking about. And if you look at like old removals of sheriffs of the 20s, it's usually like the sheriff was running a gambling den. Like that was the most typical, like the sheriff's bootlegging and they need to like be out of office. There aren't removals that are like the sheriff's arresting too many people. Interestingly, right? Because that's not a violation of the oath of office. Very kind of a weird like thing. Sorry, I'm looking. I see something about communicating to the sheriff, pushing, but I see quite a number of like, how do we push back? I see the strength of their union.
How about, are you aware of any sheriffs that are reform-minded sheriffs that have been elected in recent years and how successful they are being?
I think that so, many of you guys probably already know there was a big movement around electing like progressive prosecutors, right? And that was a movement. And I actually did some like work in that movement and reporting that movement. And so I do think sheriffs have presented kind of like an interesting difference. There's a few problems. Like one issue right now is we're sort of in a period of like criminal justice retrenchment. Like the whole country is moving away from criminal justice reform, as you guys know, with the passage of Prop 36, right? Like people are shifting away from this idea of like less policing and less jails. And so there's kind of been an issue across the country, even with progressive prosecutors. As you guys know, what happened to Chesa Boudin, what happened to in Los Angeles, right? Like there's been an issue in which like a lot of these reform-minded people have gotten voted out of office. The same has happened with people who ran as sort of progressive sheriffs. Like this round, some got unelected. And some are honestly stuck in a system where either the state law requires them to do something or they're kind of like unable to fix a complicated system. There is a new sheriff who was just elected in Michigan. She is a social worker. This could go back to like an actual concrete thing that could be done that hasn't been done in California. But she was elected. She's a social worker and she's trying to implement more like assistance oriented, like harm reduction oriented policies. One of the issues in California is that because California requires the sheriff has to be law enforcement and has to have law enforcement experience, that you can't elect someone who is like a social worker, right? You can't elect someone who's not a cop. That was done because someone ran in someone was sheriff of San Francisco who was not a cop. And the other sheriffs didn't like it, right? Quite frankly, there was a sheriff in San Francisco. He was not a cop. They didn't like it because they thought he was like not coppy enough. And so they implemented this law. I know that there was a move to change the law back to repeal these requirements. And I'll be honest and say that I don't think it went to a hearing, but I was like slated to testify in favor of it. So I could say, like, I am in favor of rolling back these requirements because I do think that, um, I, I think that, like, while I think some folks don't like the idea of electing someone with no law enforcement experience. California sees that, like, now we see like the problem with electing people with law enforcement experience, right? Like, you're sort of then stuck with like whoever is, right? You're sort of stuck with only people with lots of law enforcement experience. You can't elect someone else. And we also know, like, people who are sworn law enforcement, I mean, there's a lot of disproportionalities in terms of race and gender, right? And so as a result, like, that also results in this sort of pipeline of people available to be sheriff that's more limited as opposed to like anyone else. Um,
And
oh, I
you
saw
know, oh,
Oh no, I saw what the request to the AG would say. From Kathy. I was gonna do that one really quick. The AG could do a few things. One of the things it seems like he could do is issue just like a guiding opinion. This is sort of I mean, people will argue with it, but like one of the things AGs could do is just issue guidance that's like, I interpret the law this way, which is like California's sanctuary state law is interpreted this way. And if a county makes a rule, you have to follow it. I mean, he could just write that. He's probably not going to do that, but in my opinion, he should do so, like but this has been something that I have complained that the attorney general should do for a while. That, like, I think the attorney general should set out like guiding opinions for sheriffs to say like they can't, what they should and shouldn't be doing. And some of this relates to, like, I think what some of the questions we're bringing up were these sort of that kind of like the quote unquote constitutional sheriff movement and other sheriffs who are sort of like allergic to authority, right? That like they should just write something and say like, no, that's not the law and you have to do the law. Now, again, if he does it and if he writes and says sheriffs in California have to do X and then they don't do it, this is probably why he doesn't write it. Because if he makes that opinion and then someone doesn't follow it, now you have a problem because now they have to get in trouble, right? As we know. As we know, people are supposed to get in trouble if they don't follow the law. So then he's in the position of, well, what's he going to do? So that's why I think he doesn't want to do it.
so what I'm wondering, because there does seem to be, a lot of feedback on the idea of the attorney general or whatever body we as citizens could put pressure on about the deportation machine, but just even in general about the behavior of our sheriff. And I wonder if when I do my follow-up email, if there's a group of people who would like to help put together a little bit of a coordinated effort to perhaps contact the Attorney General, to get some letters to the editor going, to contact our Board of Supervisors just to let them know how we're feeling. And if we could run that by you, Jessica, for, just looking over whatever wording we come up with before we try to communicate. Would that be okay with you?
I promise to do my best. I'll do my best giving an opinion. How's that?
Good, good.
I see. I actually was just going to address this because I do see these questions that I think are a few questions in this realm. So someone in the comments just put about Sheriff Luna in LA. And a few people have written this, like, one about the issue of deputy unions blocking reform, and two about the fact that even when you elect a sheriff, this is what I think is the hardest thing, that even if you elect a sheriff with very good intentions, it is sometimes very hard for them to do the thing they said they would do, right? It's easy oddly, for them to do more police. Like it's easy for them to do more policing, more jailing, right? Like they can do more and more easily. It's very hard for them to do less, right? To go against like departmental grain. I do think this is like a really it's a serious problem. Like it's a really entrenched, serious problem that I think is extremely hard to combat. There's one of the issues is quite simply that because of deputy unions, you can't just fire deputies who, like, for example, in LA, they can't just fire deputies who are in gangs. It's sort of like it is like a thing that you cannot just do. They're entitled to due process. Now, one hates to sort of be like I hate to sort of be like anti-union in that way, but the unions really do, like in California, really do block a lot. But that's how they act in that way. They don't want to improve the department. They want to protect their members, right? So that's what they're doing. And I also think the issue is these sheriff's departments are large. They are entrenched. Jails are really dangerous by nature. Like Democrat run, Republican run, urban, rural, blue state, whatever, like they are not safe for people. And I mean, my opinion on it is always like there just needs to be less people in jail. Like you need to just not be putting people in there because it's obvious that like it's not safe for folks. Because that is just, I mean, it's truly like an entrenched problem. I know many wonderful people like across the country are working on this issue, and it's been a very difficult one.
Maybe just one more question.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, there were a few questions along the lines of does county sheriffs have power in the cities? Like, would the county sheriff have any power in the city of San Diego, for example?
That's kind of one of those questions that tends to be up to the local law enforcement. So technically, yes. Like technically the sheriff has like a certain like can do policing in the city of San Diego. What kind of happens usually, and then again I say usually because like people do different things. Usually they have an informal agreement. What I have found is there's informal agreements between sheriffs and police department, like because the San Diego Police Department is large, right? So they would have like an informal agreement. And sometimes what happens is sheriffs will take certain, I don't know in San Diego, I do know in Los Angeles, for example, the sheriff's department they have someone brought up contract cities. They have contract cities. They also have certain areas like colleges or parks. Like they have certain areas in the county and inside the city that they're in charge of. It can interestingly be more difficult to figure out than it should be. Like you ought to be able to just like look it up. I have found that it's sometimes just an informal agreement. Like people just informally agree. Like you're not supposed to, in theory, the sheriff's department is not supposed to just go somewhere and start doing a bunch of like traffic stops when that's where the police go. On the flip side, they have done it. I mean, they do. Alex Villanueva did it. They have done it. Let's say they don't think Prop 36 is being enforced. In theory, they could. Usually it's by like an informal agreement, but that can be very hard to figure out because an informal agreement is not like, there's no like paper. But that is probably something oversight can, I feel like that might be something you could attempt to get in writing through the Oversight Commission, although I don't know. That it feels like a thing a policy that they should be able to get, but I know it's hard.
All right. Well, we didn't get to everything, but I think we did get
No.
to a lot of the questions. And I will be following up with everybody and for people who are interested in being involved more, the Racial Justice Coalition, other groups we can direct you to, and I can try and also pull together some efforts as well. But thank you for helping us get started on this, Jessica, because I think it's something that's top of mind for everybody because of jail deaths, because of deportations, just because of this environment we're in. It seems like a place we have to begin taking a stand. So thank you very much, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you guys. I know you're all here doing the hard work. And so thank you all for, putting in the hard work. It happens locally. So I know that I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. And what I'm going to do in just the next 5 minutes is share my screen again and just go over a few upcoming events that I want to tell you about. And few people have already been asking about protests that are happening. And yes, I will get to them. I'm just going back to this earlier slide, though, because I failed to mention the co-sponsors for this event, not just the Racial Justice Coalition, who you heard from, but the Democratic Women's Club, the Pacific Beach Democratic Club, the Indivisible Chapter, Change Begins with Me, the Alliance for Community Engagement, and the Cannabis Education Project. So thank you all for helping co-sponsor this. And now I'll go to upcoming actions and events. So our website has an actions web page. It's takeactionsandiego.org/actions. Larry will put that in the chat and it'll be in my email. These days, I'm updating it every 2 or 3 days. So whatever you hear today, it will probably be different in a few more days. So check it regularly. But some actions this coming week. I talked about how one of the main things we want to do is delay, obstruct, and protest the MAGA agenda. What we are really advocating for this week is for people to organize against what's called the SAVE Act. A lot of you may have heard about it. It is basically a voter disenfranchisement piece of legislation. It was passed in the former House session. They're going to try and pass it again, probably in the next few weeks, and it would go on to the Senate at that point. The idea is that every voter, in order to register or even to re-register if you move, would have to have either a birth certificate or a passport, and that's it. Almost no other documentation. And just women who change their names when they get married kind of automatically can't register. People who don't have easy access, there's tens of millions of people who do not have easy access to either of those documents. You have to register in person because you have to show up with one of these documents. It has to be the original. So people who live in rural areas, people who can't get into wherever the voter registration is happening, there would be no more online voter registration because you have to do it in person, and about a million other bad things about it. It's blatantly a voter disenfranchisement act. So we're asking people to call their Congress members and their 2 senators and urge them to vote, demand that they vote no on the SAVE Act. And then where they are being organized, or you can organize one yourself, to get a delegation to your congressperson's office, especially this coming week. The House is in recess this week. They're all home. Some of them are doing town halls. Scott Peters, my congressman, is doing a town hall, and I think we're going to organize to show up there to ask him about this. You can also arrange delegations to the congressman's office, the congressperson's office. Even if you can't talk to them, you can talk to their staff. And if you think, oh, I've got a Democrat, they'll vote the right way, think twice. They've not been doing that well. I mean, some have been heroes, don't get me wrong, but some Democrats really need to have their spines stiffened, and even the really good ones need to know that we're out there. So please consider getting involved with calls, delegations on the SAVE Act. Similar story, but this time it's just the Senate, and it's Kash Patel coming up, one of the last of the nominees that the Senate will consider for FBI. And I think most of you know why he's a dangerous, horrible choice. Sort of like if you turned the list upside down on who's eligible for a job like that, he would be at the top, only if it was an upside down list. So we have information on our website and also in my emails about how to make both of those calls. And just in case you're wondering, the calls do make a difference. AOC has a great video on social media talking about why the calls are so important. You may have heard we broke the switchboard at the at the in the Congress last week with so many of us calling in. Usually it is Republicans calling in about bills. I heard something like 8-1, usually Republicans to Democrats calling in. So when they hear from us in big numbers, it means something, and they know that we're out there and that we're watching them. So the calls are easy to make. So please do that. There were also at least two actions coming up that I think you will be interested in. The first is this Monday. There's a call for demonstrations, protests, either at state capitals or city halls or county buildings, a national day of protest against the MAGA agenda in general. In San Diego, it will be 10 a.m. In front of the county building at Waterfront Plaza. And we have put in the chat, and I'll put in my email, a link that you can just type in your town or city, and it'll show you where the closest protest has been. It's being organized by this 5051 group that no one knows exactly who they are. It's very grassroots. It's very much coming up from the bottom. They organized a large number of protests last week, and all went incredibly well, peacefully, and that's what we're expecting to happen. On Monday, you'll see that the graphic I have says 12 p.m. That is not the case for San Diego. It's going to be 10 a.m., but it's going to be a different time depending on where you go. And the other thing you can get involved in, and hopefully you can spread the word on both of these to everyone you know, is a 24-hour economic blackout on February 28th. The idea is to basically try to buy nothing, but certainly nothing from large corporations, gas stations, whatever, for a 24-hour time period. The main reason to do this, a one-day, 24-hour boycott's probably not going to have Jeff Bezos go out of business. Nobody thinks that that's what's going to happen. But what we do think it can happen is if enough people are involved, it shows us flexing our muscles. It shows that we can organize. It shows that we want to act. And it shows that we will follow up with larger and larger protests as time goes on. It's a pretty easy thing for people to do, so it's an easy ask for friends maybe that might not do other things. Well, why don't you read it, Larry? Because I don't see it. In Also this week, and one of the main things we want to do is win elections in the coming year. And the first important one coming up is April 1st in Wisconsin. I talked about this last month. It is the Wisconsin Supreme Court, where the results of this election will either give a majority to Democrats or to Republicans. Susan Crawford is the person running, and there are calls and letters that can be written in her support, and we have links for that. And yeah, Larry, what was the comment?
Well, there's how to get more information about how to attend Scott Peters Town Hall, and that it was someone also commented that it was going to be virtual.
Yeah, you probably know more about it than me at this point. I just heard about it. If Raj is here, Ann Callies, I think, was the person who brought it to my attention. So what I will do in my follow-up email is get all the details I can get about that town hall meeting, but I believe it is being planned for the 26th of February. But I'll follow up on that. Another sort of facet of what we're trying to do this year is to make the MAGA agenda as unpopular as possible, but that means letting people know about it. And that means mostly social media. So for those of you who are not on social media, certainly urging you to get involved. But for those of you who are, there's some tools that make it a lot easier to get the word out. One is there's going to be a Zoom workshop, February 21st, on how to make your messaging as effective as possible. There are social media toolkits available from a variety of organizations. We have links to those organizations where they create the graphics or even suggested text, and all you have to do is copy and paste. And then what you can do on your own is if you see an article in the newspaper about inflation going up or gas prices going up or egg prices going up or people being rounded up, just post that article on social media. People are not going to be that happy with a lot of what's happening, but we need to make sure they know about it. And finally, yes, we're thinking globally and nationally, but we also want to continue to work locally. And one of the ways you can do that is to sign up for our next meeting, where it's another Zoom meeting. We're going to have two speakers that, again, I'm just thrilled that they were able to do this. One is Dr. Cody Pedersen, the San Diego School Board president, who's going to be talking about how local activists can protect public education. And he's from San Diego, but he's going to be giving us advice, I think, for people wherever they are. Our second speaker is going to be Genevieve Jones-Wright. Many of you know her. She's a local activist. She ran for mayor, and she's now the executive director of a moral governance organization. And she's going to be talking about what our vision for 2025 is and how we can organize around that. So again, she's on the wavelength of let's start talking about what we're for and what we're organizing for and not just what we're against. So she's going to have guidance, I think, for people not just in San Diego, but for everywhere, and urge you to sign up for that meeting. And finally, I think, those of you who read my last few newsletters, excuse me, my voice gets squeaky sometimes, know that I've been just really concerned about the trend in the media saying the left is dead, it's moribund, it's in disarray. I think what we all saw this week is people are starting to figure out how to take action and to get organized. And whether it's the prosecutors and judges and legal organizations who are really taking some courageous stands. I think you've read about the 7 prosecutors who have resigned rather than drop the case against the mayor of New York, Eric Adams. And some of the quotes that I have here on the screen, that those 2 prosecutors, both of whom, by the way, are arch conservatives. We probably wouldn't agree with them on almost anything, but they believe in their role as prosecutors. And I think that when they stand up, it gives other people the courage to stand up as well. Our members of Congress, it has been all over the board, but there are some real heroes showing up. And some of them were not the ones I expected, like Senator Chris Murphy, who's turned out to be just dynamic and strong and clear about the anti-MAGA agenda. Same for Senator Brian Schatz from Hawaii. AOC, of course, is always wonderful, and there's a host of other people in Congress that have been good. There's governors that are standing up, our own Gavin Newsom and Josh Shapiro in Pennsylvania, and mayors as well, like Brandon Johnson from Chicago. These are just a few, and it's going to take a lot more. But probably the most important piece of all of this is us. And in the last 2 weeks, you have all shown up to make calls and write letters and do delegations and get in the street and protest. And we're going to have to keep it up for a while. This is going to be a way of life for us, I think, for the next several years. So we got to pace ourselves. But I thank you all so much for doing what you have done and for staying in touch. I will stay in touch with you. And yeah, we truly are stronger together. Hopefully, I'll see you before March 22nd at a delegation or at the protest on Monday. But otherwise, stay well, take care of yourself, and thank you so much for being here.